I welcome Satya Chakravarthy sir for this podcast. This is a kind of a podcast where we are not just trying to demystify what is aeronautical technology or the aerospace technology all about to him. It's also about everybody. We are just going to discuss about the problem statements. We are just going to discuss about every little aspects that uses software and the hardware. And this entrepreneurial journey is something which has to be seen through because it can be a case study to some guys who literally nag about their life saying that I'm in academia and I can't really go away from my comfort zone. Also, I'm in the industry and I can't really work on something new. And to those people who really say that reason, I want you guys to look back at this podcast and listen to what he has to say about his journey. And in a meanwhile, make sure that you get your coffees right and you have that motivation to get that understanding of what his journey is also all about, because it's not something that easy to understand what aerospace industry is also all about if you're a newbie. And I think, trust me, this is an honor for me to have Satya Chakravarthy sir on this podcast. And I'm just enjoying just doing my podcast. So thank you so much, sir, for giving me this podcast. It's an honor to have you on my podcast.
Fine. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Yep. Let's just start with this. You have seen this journey of being an entrepreneur. You're also a teacher right now. So you teach hundreds of people. There's a theory behind every teacher. Like, even if you grow old, you don't understand the age because students will still remain the same. Like, the same age group of the students will be seen by you. So you're young at heart. But I want to refresh that memory of yours. Like, who was the same Satya Chakravarthy sir? Like 15 years old, 20-year-old Chakravarthy sir. Who was he? Like, what is he perceiving the world as? And what was his dreams all about? Because I want to demystify that and just move on with the podcast. So who was Satya Chakravarthy sir when he was 15 years old and 20 years old? That's what my question is.
When I was 15 years old as a student, I mean, okay.
Yes.
Or is it 15 years ago? I mean, I don't know.
15-year-old student.
15 years. Okay, that's very difficult to relate to where I am today, right? Because I think my generation is actually kind of like vastly different, because when we grew up in India, we didn't really have too many opportunities. We didn't really have too much exposure. So when I was 15 years old, to be very precise, I did not know that there was an IIT that existed, for example. Although it is so strange that my maternal uncle was actually an IIT, and I didn't even bother to find out like where he went to college and what was it all about. So it's only when I went past my 10th standard, and that's like around 15, right? So I think only when I was getting into 11th, I actually realized there was something called an IIT that I used to always drive past in a bus going from, let's say, Mylapore to Mambalam or something like that in IIT Madras, past IIT Madras, and never really bothered to figure out like what that campus was all about and so on. In fact, back in those days, they didn't even have like a board in front of the IIT to say it was IIT. So nobody knew, right? So yeah, just a studious person in school. Always used to be clocking like the second or third rank. The first rank was always reserved for a girl who was much more studious. And yeah, that's about it. And nothing spectacular about me as a kid. I mean, I used to sketch. I used to play the violin, all of those things, but they are like kind of extracurricular. I mean, used to do some electronic gizmos. Nothing. I mean, this is like we are talking about in the mid '80s. I think it's a vastly different generation today when compared to that. So, nothing much to brag about.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Because, that age is the place where we lose that adrenal rush. Like, we just calm ourselves down and we realize the fact that world is complex. And that's where I asked this question. And also, like, I would love to ask about, like, how did your academic journey start? Like, you are an IITian, because not being an IITian was no big deal right now, because nobody cares whether you are from IIT until and unless you're skilled up to be that best engineer. But in those days, even with being skilled, but also having that tag really matter. But like, I just want to ask you this one question: like, what was your academic journey? Like, how did your academia journey start? And of course, of course, I know that you have a PhD, but like, as a teacher, how satisfied are you influencing people? Also, that's what my question is. Also, like, how did your academic journey start?
So yeah, so this is again a confusing question. I mean, because I am a professor, my academic journey starts from school all the way to present today. Are you? I mean, but somewhere along the line, I actually stepped into being a professional academic. Whereas until some point, I was essentially a student. Up to my PhD, I was a student. After that, I was becoming a professional academic. Which academic career are you talking about? Either the student career or the
Student and the professional part, that both.
Okay, that straddles a fairly large distance. I think I can. Let's quickly, go through certain touch points along the way, and because I think you may have students who are actually watching this. So one of the things back in my days was that we did not have the JEE craze, and that I think that was like a hugely great thing back then for most of us. For example, I think 55,000 students wrote the JEE when I cleared the JEE, right? And I got the 835th rank. And there were only totally about 2,000 ranks that could be given. Right now, all of that stuff actually sounds very crazy because I think that we should have had much more than 55,000 students, right? And today, I think there are like about more than 13 lakh students, right? Right, actually the JEE main. But it would be better off if you are able to come up with a system by which we don't have to run a rat race, going through coaching and all of those things. That really kills a lot of what should I say, creativity and so on. So that's one of the things that I going back. I mean, I was completely oblivious to what's the rat race when I was going through my school. I woke up one day after all my schooling, and I had screwed up my Pilani application. My uncle said that Pilani is too far, so just put only a couple of courses for your choices, and I didn't get any of those. And then I was stuck. So then I said, okay, let me give it a shot to prepare for the JEE. And I think that started only sometime in October of that year, because my sister was getting married, and we were all worried about that. And so sometime between October to May is when I actually ramped up my JEE prep. In the as a dropout, as a drop year where I have signed up for a BSc in Vivekananda College, and cracked the JEE. But I think from then on, it seemed like I was actually a nerd. I mean, I couldn't have admitted it as a teenager, but looking, I think pretty soon as I became like about 20-ish, it was very clear that I was a nerd. Uh, and I think for all of those guys who think you might be half nerds and you don't want to admit it because you want to look cool to girlfriends, just don't bother. Just admit it. I mean, it's far easier to admit that you're a nerd and go on and look for girlfriends who would come by you for that rather than try to fake it, right? So those are things that I went through as a I didn't have to bother about girlfriends in my case, but still, as a teenager, you're a bit confused. Are you trying to look cool versus do you want to be a nerd? You could actually be a cool nerd, right? So I think that's what it is. Maybe I was like that, and I did try to give a shot at like management and all those things, and pretty soon realized that the research was something that I was more interested in, and then tried to pursue a PhD. Again, it was a bit tentative. Again, what I find a lot of students is they don't want to commit to a PhD. They want to actually dabble with the masters and then think about what to do next and so on. In many cases, if you're actually a nerd, you're also sort of like obedient. So when I went up to my master's thesis advisor, I mean, I got an I-20 to go to Georgia Tech for just 1 year for a master's. Okay. And my mother really thought that, I mean, I showed my I-20 to her, and she thought that I'm actually going to come back after 1 year of education in the US. And whereas I went there not knowing exactly what I was getting into, because I had applied for a PhD, and I thought that was going to take a lot more than a year, and the I-20 did not reflect that. So when I went and met my advisor, he was assuming that I was going to be a PhD. PhD student, right? So that kind of settled it. So which means that I kind of slipped into a PhD right from day one, and this is very important, right? So if you ever want to do a PhD anytime in your life, do it before your master's. Okay, start doing your PhD even before you start your master's. That's more important thing, because you can just completely finish that entire track, be done with it. So in my case, the interesting thing was, well, I think I can also talk to you about something interesting that happened in my bachelor's. So when you step into the first year, particularly I don't know about the other colleges, but in IITs, there is this problem about branch change, right? So when you get in there, if you're one of those later branches guys, right? And there's always this pressure to actually get back to being an earlier branch guy, because I think that's kind of like the All India rank fetish, that you're always gunning for a higher All India rank, and you didn't get it, therefore you got a branch. All these things are actually sort of like a from the socialist era. I mean, it's a problem of actually trying to artificially create scarcity, and then people allowing us to run rat races, branding a rank on our foreheads, and then slotting us into different branches. It's happening even today, right? That's actually so sad. I mean, on the other hand, if people actually were to ask, okay, fine, if you let people take whatever they want to take, everybody will be taking computer science. Fine, let's just allow that. I mean, let's have that market happen. Okay, if you now suddenly realize that everybody becomes a computer scientist, and then we don't have brinjal to cultivate for our food, then the brinjal guy will actually become the next computer science kind of guy, because that'll be that's exactly what it's all about, right? Let the market play it out, and our academic institutions are not doing that. That's actually a very, very sad thing. Not only during my times, it's still actually like that. Okay, so when you now get in there, and then there is this next rat race for the branch change. So I actually became like second in the branch, right? And with not much effort as much as the first guy. The first guy was like far ahead of me, and I was second, and without much effort, right? And of course, I couldn't pretend that I was not caring about branch change, nor I was really caring about branch change, right? So just go study and go write the exams, see what we get, and try your best. That's always the nerdish approach. So I got second, and then in aerospace we had like about 18 people, so 2 people can actually change the branch within 10%. So I got my branch. I actually got branch change to mechanical, right? And then I started thinking, wait a minute, if I actually take a branch change to mechanical, I will be actually the 26th out of 60 people. Whereas if I actually stayed back and the first guy actually takes the branch change, I'll become the topper, right? So I just said, I'm not going to take the branch. So that gave me a head start ahead of everybody else in the branch. And all I had to do was to hold my position, and I actually cleared as a topper till by the end, right? So that was sort of like a strategic thinking in that sense. That's why I want to dial back. So a sort of similar weird situation happened in my PhD. So the first day I actually go to college at Georgia Tech, right? It so happened that an Indian student was actually finishing his PhD and leaving from Georgia Tech for his job from having got his PhD from my advisor, same advisor, right? So he looked at me, and I befriended him, and he helped me with the registration process for the courses and all of that. And then he took me to the cafeteria to have a cup of coffee. And then he said, "You know what, Satya? Our advisor is actually fairly old. He's 70 years old. He's a gem of a person. He's the oldest surviving rocket scientist in the world. He's very famous. All of that stuff. But he had a heart attack when he was 52. So we are not sure whether he's going to survive through your PhD." Okay, so you might want to actually think about switching over to another advisor, and there is this Professor Zinn, who is like a he's very difficult to deal with. You will hardly get to see him. If you want to actually enter his office, you will have to actually show data, and then he will be roaring like a lion in a den. And then if you show data from at the entrance, he will actually pull out a human mask and wear it, and then start looking at you and maybe smile if you're lucky. I decided, no, I think I want to settle with Professor Price, right? Even though he's old, and I mean, just believe in God and see what happens. right? So I didn't do anything. In fact, as a matter of fact, I wrote to Professor Price at the end of at the beginning of my seventh semester, right? Because my BTech guide actually told me he's one of those big shots in the field, right? And he wrote back saying he is going to retire because he's like 70 and so on. So I kind of left it at that, but I applied to Georgia Tech. I got the admission and full financial aid, but that was, I think, was like a state funding so that I'll be a TA or whatever. And then he wrote to me saying, I find that you actually got admitted with state funding. I am now extending my tenure as an emeritus professor, and I have research funding from Office of Naval Research. I would like to take you. So why don't you write to the graduate school and ask them to be put under me and deny the state funding, and I will actually give you the same money. I was like, this is awesome, right? So I wrote back, and then I got myself actually assigned to Professor Price and got his funding instead of the state funding. And then this man tells me, this outgoing student tells me I have to change. I'm like, no way. I think I got to work with Professor Price, so I should actually continue to work with Professor Price. He sought me out, and then so on. So I go meet Professor Price, and then he says, you're here for the PhD, and he just made that decision for me. Right? It was like a default decision. Didn't even think about it. And then, but this thing that he might actually die within 4 years, right, was always hanging as a sword. So I really worked so hard, like 15 hours a day, like for 4 years straight, like a sadhu sannyasi, like just keep your eyes at it, right? and I got my PhD in just 4 years, right, including masters, right? So that was like one of the fastest PhDs that you can think of, and there was a good motivation going for it. And thankfully for me, my advisor passed away only by about 2012 June. I mean, like when he was 92. So he actually survived for a way longer period after 95. And I had a chance to meet him many times over after that and so on. Very, very nice thing to go through with him. Then again, when I was actually the end of my PhD, so I was, that's other thing about me, right? So when I was doing my BTech, right, we were a class of nerds. Okay, we're always together. We were always discussing what was going on in the class. We used to actually do experiments in the hostel to validate what we were learning in the class. We used to have a lot of fun doing all of that stuff in the nights, and go for chai in the nights. Always discuss. So I used to kind of pull myself back and say, why are we so nerdish? I mean, there were some guys who were not at all nerdish. They were having fun and so on, but we were a bunch of guys who were always nerdish, right? And then and I was wondering like why we were so. And it so happened that about 9 guys out of my batch actually wanted to come back to teach at IIT Madras. Okay, so we felt we had like so much love for what we were learning and the profs that were teaching us, and we were so excited about it. 9 out of 14 were actually wanting to come and teach, and as of today, we have only 2 of us. Right, so everybody else sort of frittered away. I mean, they just found their careers, and I mean, I'm pretty sure they're much happier for it, right? So, but then I think I'm kind of like this Forrest Gump kind of character, right? So I said, okay, fine. I'm supposed to come back to IIT Madras because that's what I have figured out, and that's what we have all thought of. So every time I used to come on a vacation back from Georgia Tech, I used to visit my department, talk to my faculty, and so on. It's sort of like throwing in a handkerchief. The next time you to remove the handkerchief, put a towel, and third time you put a dhoti, and make sure that you're actually securing a place. But it wasn't too hard because the faculty were actually in love with me. They really felt that I was one of those guys that they can trust, that will actually come back and so on. So when I finished my PhD, the IIT system was actually not geared for taking people from abroad directly, by the way. Okay, so they have this thing about you have to set up interviews, you have to show up in person, and so on. In fact, IIT Kanpur was like going much ahead of it and making offers even without interviews, right? At the time, they had bypassed all of that. And the IITs are actually autonomous. That means like if they get their board approval, they can do those things, right? But IIT Madras was a lot more, conventional. And then they were they wouldn't actually make an offer without an interview. We don't have online interviews like today, right? So one of my seniors actually decided to go to IIT Madras, and we were kind of like, he was like, what do you call the trial balloon for me, right? And it took a long time for him to actually get the job offer. Whereas what happened with me was I finished my PhD and I thought that it's going to take, and they were actually looking for a postdoc experience at that time. So uh, I thought that I'll actually get do a postdoc because IIT Madras requires a postdoc experience. So I told my professor, he was actually very happy to have me as a postdoc. But you know what I did was I said, let me actually try what my worth is. And then I applied to about 40 places, right? I got 4 offers. And the good thing about my prof was every time I actually got an offer, he would bump up his offer by another $1,000. And that was actually a very good thing for me because if I had just settled for my prof, right, I wouldn't have got like $3,000 more, right? So that was good. Now the other thing was like, okay, they wanted about the 3-year postdoc experience. My prof was willing to give me 3 years postdoc experience with all the additional bumping up the offer and stuff. But I write thinking that it's going to take a long time for me to get the job. I write the letter to the HOD of Aerospace at that time. I think I finished my PhD in December of 1995 and took about a breather of about 2 or 3 months and then wrote in March. April, I actually get an offer. Okay, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is not supposed to happen. This is not what we had planned. This is not right. So then I had to actually bargain with them, saying, I've just taken this offer, thinking that you need a 3-year postdoc experience. I have now talked to my prof and then see if can at least hold on for about 1.5 years to actually make good what I'm going to do. And so we bargained and then said, okay, fine, take 1 more year to join, right? So that's how we got it. And the other thing was around this time, my parents were also getting anxious for me to get married, right? And the girls were always looking at me as an American bridegroom, and that was going to be a problem because I was thinking of coming back. So finally, we found a bride who was accepting the fact, kind of without believing me, that I'm actually going to come back. And now, if I have to actually show some promise, I have to take her back to US, right? So I needed some staying, time for me to have like an extended honeymoon, right? And that's what happened. And when I actually when I actually came back, right? So when we packed our bags and came back, my wife was still not in believing that I was actually doing that back then. So why I'm saying all these things is these things are all hugely intertwined. And the kind of situation that people are in, it takes a lot of different considerations for you to take decisions and go on. So once I came here, I wasn't actually sure, what I was going to do, because this is another problem, right? So let's say you set your sight saying that this is my goal, right? And then you keep on working for this goal. This happens to pretty much a lot of people who are going through their GE mill, right? So they think, okay, they have not thought through what happens next, right? So same thing. So my deal was I want to actually come back to IIT Madras as a professor. Then what? Because I don't know, right? So if I have to just follow the props that I was beginning to emulate when I was a BTech student, all I have to do is pretty much teach, do a little bit of research. It's a very lackadaisical, very calm atmosphere. Nothing great going on, but I had actually really busted for about 4 years trying to do some very fast research and all that stuff. So I got used to a much more busy schedule, right? And now I come here, I'm actually a misfit in a very slow this thing, right? So that's the good thing about the IIT system. They, at least when I joined, they don't tell you what to do, okay? Which means that if you want to actually do things in a fast-paced manner, they won't stop you, right? So it's pretty much up to you to do whatever you want. And of course, they will kind of check about 5 years later if you're ready for a promotion or something, if you've clocked some progress, and then they will give you a promotion. Otherwise, they will say, maybe you have to take some more time and so on. There was hardly any pressure, right? So, but because I was habituated to a very fast-paced progress that I had done, and that's because my professor was supposed to die, right? So, but now I got used to it. Nobody is dying, but I still I actually had that inertia. This is the key thing about a lot of success, right? So if you have I mean, that's what they say. Success. What is it? Nothing succeeds like success. So if you succeed, then you keep on going, right? So that allowed me to clock my promotions in my career progression fairly quickly. Within about the 97, I joined. 98, become as a visiting faculty, because that's how they would take you in. 98, I become like a regular assistant professor. 2003, I become associate professor. 2000, I was supposed to get 2008, but there was a legal problem with IIT Madras. So they gave the actual order in 2009. So every 5 years I was actually clocking. So that by the time I was 40, I was actually a full prof. I still have another 25 years to go, right, as a full prof, And today it's kind of like becoming commonplace. A lot of people are doing this very fast, but back in those days, it was sort of like a fast-paced, progress. Clock a lot of publications, have a lot of PhD students, and do a lot of research, increase your profile in the international arena, exposing yourself to all the big conferences, and then get into becoming like session chairs and conferences, and be part of the larger international community, right? And then so on. So all of that stuff was actually going on very well. So I was, in fact, one of the important things to say is that I think we were the India's first in setting up like a very credible laser diagnostics lab for combustion research. So that was like that was making us look very prominent in all the DRDO circles where they would come and work with us. And GE started actually taking notice of it and started working with us. And similarly, lots of such projects we were doing. So that's when we had this opportunity to, we were solicited at IIT Madras along with ISC for a proposal to set up the National Center for Combustion Research and Development. So, and that happened in a big way, and that just took us to a completely next level. We now have like the world's largest combustion research center. And that's when we were actually asked to do some innovative stuff. And once we did the innovative combustion research, then the next question was, how are we going to actually put it into the market? And that's when the word market actually hit my head. Until then, I never bothered about it, right? So, and then the startup journey started, and so then I kind of stepped into entrepreneurship and so on.
Yeah, I can understand the value of education in your life. Like, it's the matter that you really care, and it has really made you so great right now. And you're adhering to the fact that educating myself in that right way actually made me what I am today. That's actually true, sir. That's actually true. Sir, I would love to ask you, like, what's the need for studying aerospace and aeronautic technology right now today? Because we still say that we don't want to work on with the mathematical equations, we don't want to go behind the complexity of it, we will just get the DIY kit somehow or the other. But like, I just want to ask you this one question, because you are so passionate about the journey that you had, and also you were so passionate about the entrepreneurial journey also you had. I would love to ask, like, what's the need today to understand aerospace and aeronautics to every person today?
Well, there are two questions in your question. One is, aerospace or aeronautics is an application, right, of engineering. If you ask the question, do we have to do that at all? Then the question is, do we have air travel? Do we go to space or not, right? So the way I look at aerospace is, in fact, aerospace is actually a cult. It's not even an engineering discipline. It's more like you got to be like really passionate about it. Okay, so what it essentially means is that we have to think of it as something like the harbinger of human civilization to the rest of the universe. Okay, so from Earth, so we have to essentially say we are here in this Earth, which is like a small size planet to an average life star in the solar system. But from here, in 1958 or so, whenever Sputnik was launched, right, started a journey where you now kind of leap out of Earth's surface, right, instead of being stuck like ants on the Earth's surface, and now get into space. And from there, we go to the moon, we go to Mars, we go out of the solar system, and so on. And while we are doing all of that stuff, we are also progressively screwing up our own planet, right? So we need to think about alternate. I mean, just like what Elon Musk is doing, but I used to actually propagate the same idea to my students all the time, right? So it is important for the human civilization to progress, farther and farther into other regions. And so when, let's say, for example, we actually sort of settled Mars, and then let's say we had like a very nice, great population in Mars, you will have aerospace engineers trying to fly planes within Mars, right, in the Martian atmosphere. So we would actually call them as terrestrial aerospace engineers, right? The aerospace engineers who are actually still sticking within Earth's atmosphere or Martian atmosphere, they are all still terrestrial, aerospace engineers. And then you have these truly space-faring aerospace engineers, right? So you have to ask the question: okay, are you asking, do we need them because we can actually do Zoom calls across, the rest of the world, so we don't need to travel anymore? Can we actually focus on teleportation? Yeah, sure. I mean, please do all of those things, right? So, but until you actually conquer teleportation, right, we have the need for traveling across the world. So we will always want to actually see how fast we can get from one place to the other. Is it possible for me to actually get from one place to the other anywhere in the world within about an hour or 5 hours or whatever it is, right? So we need to keep on shrinking those times. The other thing is we want to actually make it much more affordable. I want to be able to actually fly from my home to my office on a daily basis instead of having to trudge along in a car or a motorbike or a two-wheeler or a bus, right? So there are multiple ways in which aerospace is going to, present itself out for technological development of human civilization. That's the way I look at it, right? So if you didn't have an aerospace engineer, human civilization will perish. That's like essentially what I'm saying, right? So you can keep your AI, you can keep your ML, all of those things, but I think we need the aerospace engineer for the human civilization to survive. Is what is the cult feeling here, right? So that said, do you want to learn the equations and do all of that stuff? That's a different matter, right? That's a matter of how the science is evolving, right? So when we say science, we used to actually think of science as something that we want to understand. But the moment you actually say you want to go do AI, you want to intuit rather than you want to understand, right? So you're going going to a slightly different level of cognition. All right. It's a question of getting used to it. So I mean, there are people that I have. When I grew up, there were people who are actually saying you are missing out something by using calculators instead of calculators, right, or whatever it is, right, or logarithmic tables and so on. There are, I mean, so when we are in transition, we never know what we are missing out, what we are gaining, and so on. Whether a plane that is designed 50 years from now, will it actually use Navier-Stokes equations or not? I have no idea. Okay, I think all of that stuff is fine. I mean, we have to allow for these things to evolve. So finally, we want to have a very safe plane made, which takes people by the thousands or millions from place A to place B, anywhere across the universe, right? And that's the kind of thing we want, right? So whether we do it with Navier-Stokes equations or whether we actually do it with AI, ML, deep learning, whatever it is, I think that doesn't matter ultimately. But there are these Puritans who would say, "Hey, come on, how can Satya Chakravarthy, let go of Navier-Stokes equations?" Because I'm not the one who owns the Navier-Stokes equations myself, right? It was discovered by some great guys in their times, and maybe some other great guys will come and discover something more or something better going forward. We have to be open to what's the best tools we use for designing these hardware. So if you ask the question whether the hardware itself is required, I answer that question. Yes, of course, we require.
Yeah. Sir, you also have an entrepreneurial journey in like aerospace itself. Like you have been co-founder of Agnikul, and this is one of the companies which actually made a breakthrough about the rocket engine itself, like the way in which the propulsion, the combustion, and everything is happening. I just want to understand, like, what was your journey as an entrepreneur? Because you actually summarized that question in a very short way, but I want to understand what's your journey as an entrepreneur.
Pretty hard. uh, it's always like this, right? That is, whenever you're doing something and you reach a very good mature stage at it, you always ask, okay, is that all there is? Can I do something better or more? I'm not sure of the better part, but always looking to do something different, something hopefully better, but something more, whatever, right? So uh, the entrepreneurial journey was sort of logical. I mean, I always need some logic to decide on getting it. I don't do things by whims and fancy, and it's sort of like a head over heart kind of algorithm that I have right from the beginning. And what that means is that the moment my head thinks through the need for doing something, it then informs the heart to actually put all the passion it takes to get it going. So the heart is actually just as important. And for most people who don't really go follow this algorithm, I would actually suggest to them, just follow your heart. Don't worry about anything, right? Because that's actually a straightforward thing to do. And that's actually the one that matters. You need to have your heart on the job. If your heart is not in it, it's not possible for you to do anything, right? But what I'm saying is kind of like an icing on the cake, if you will. I mean, I'm trying to make it like a virtue, but not exactly. I'm just saying this is what I am. So I think through something, and then my head informs the heart to fall in love with it, right? So, and then it's a very informed fashion, that in that sense. So the reason why we were actually going through uh, this thing, what do you call, entrepreneurship, was, as I said, we were clocking some innovative stuff in our combustion center as mandated by the funding agency. And this is again pushed. Otherwise, I would have simply been doing this conventional research, publishing papers, having PhD students, going to conferences, and becoming like bigger and bigger academic, like, editing journals and whatever it is, or giving like plenary lectures, right? So the professors basically fancy themselves as, becoming bigger and bigger, doing all of these things. But that's it. That's all they are. I mean, at every level, we have always this, that this is all there is, right? Nothing more. And that would be true for entrepreneurship as well. I mean, no matter like whether you're Elon Musk, if there is like a meteor that comes and hits you tomorrow, it's all gone, right? So we don't. I mean, there is like a temporariness, a transience about life. There is no doubt about it, right? And then everybody tries to actually see how best they can go and reach the top of where they are. That's what I would have done. But the combustion center essentially, challenged us to say, you have to do some grand challenges in combustion, and we formulated those grand challenges. And in fact, we could realize that the moment you actually are solving a grand challenge problem as a research problem of practical importance, you realize that a lot of actually academics have not wanted to solve the problem at all. They work in silos. They want to actually show their expertise in that particular problem, and it almost looks like they want to kind of like continue to keep the problem live without solving it, right? Because a full solution will require like a rounded approach to multiple ways of doing it. But academics actually are so specialized; they will actually look at only one part of the problem. So long as they are looking at only one part of the problem will always be alive. They'll never really solve it. So we understood all this as a combustion center, because we were having multiple faculty, I mean, multidisciplinary faculty colleagues who could approach the problem in different ways and work together and so on. The moment we got some of these grand challenges going and got some very good results, the top of the line, spectacular results that we could, clock and publish, I started thinking, what is the all used for, right? So until we are just keeping a problem alive and studying it and publishing papers, it's okay to just do that, right? But if you have something that's like a solution to a problem, like let's say a gas turbine in combustion problem, or a coal gasification problem, or any of those kinds of very, very literally burning problems, right? Pun intended there, right? Very often in combustion. So we want to say, hey, we have to actually see this through the, see this through, so that it sees the light of day. It has to be practically implemented. Then comes the question, who are we going to actually go to for practically implementing it? And these are very large companies. It could be automotive companies, or it could be gas turbine companies, it could be thermal power plants, and so on. And nowhere in the world that these kinds of large companies actually believe that academics can solve any problem. This is actually the biggest secret, right? So they take like quick solutions here and there that are like incremental and that can be applied, but not like completely changing the architecture kind of solutions. Because they have invested a lot in what they are doing. They think they are actually leading the show, and so on. So if you become a big company, you have a problem in not actually encouraging innovation anymore. This is a problem that they also understand, but they are stuck because millions of dollars are actually in stake. So they cannot take an academic solution, pick it up, and then go with it, right? So we found that there was like a lot of resistance from big companies in picking it up very quickly. And they become very bureaucratic, right? So somebody else has to take the decision. So the guy that we are talking to is an R&D man, but the person who has to take the decision is like a CEO who is not probably a R&D expert. So these things are difficult to wade through, and it takes time. So that's when the idea of startups came in, with students walking in and say, "Hey, can we actually do these things?" And we said, "Sure, why not?" But then I realized it's one thing to have technology developed. Another thing is to actually be able to find a product into which you want to put it, right? Because certain technologies will work only at certain scales. That means that the product has to be of a particular scale, or I have to map this technology to a smaller scale, right? And so on. So why am I having to do smaller scale? Because I cannot be like an overnight GE, right? So I cannot even start up a GE. If I go and tell an investor, I'm going to be the next GE, give me money, nobody will tell me. Nobody will give me, right? So I can't think about like this big engine to be made in the first place, like what those kind of companies are doing. So we will have to make small engines. We have to make small rockets, right? So we have to make small planes. So how do I adapt this technology to smaller versions of it when compared to how it has actually been played out in bigger constructs is itself a challenge. Like, so translating the technology from the lab to a product and configure it in a small, affordable manner is one thing. But if you now do this, the next question to ask is, what's the market for it? Are you just going to do a product just for the sake of developing a product, just to showcase your technology? Who cares, right? Where is the market for it? Then you have to actually go and analyze the market. You have to find out customers and what are the different customer segments and what kind of margins you will clock. Is it like a sunrise industry? Is it something that's going to grow? What is the growth? Are you able to project like an exponential growth? That's what a startup is all about, right? So these are things that I had to kind of learn very, very quickly, right? Because none of these things was actually part of my repertoire until about 2016 or 2017. Okay. And all of a sudden, I have to actually learn a lot of entrepreneurial jargon and think through all of that stuff. And what has actually happened because of that today is I'm kind of an unconventional entrepreneur. One of the things that I've seen in a lot of things, even in academia as well, right? There's a huge amount of herd mentality. It starts from from your school student days, right? It's a huge amount of herd mentality. Entrepreneurs are hugely herdish. Investors are like even more herdish. I can actually say this in public. I don't have a problem, right? So in this, because I actually have learned it from coming from from outside, right? I tend to question everything, right? I don't accept things just because it is herdish, right? And that poses some difficulties. Okay, so but people see through it. Like if I'm actually having my fundamentals right, right, and I'm asking the right questions and I'm solving the right problems, people see that. So there is some what do you call success that we are clocking because we are doing the right things, because we are taking advantage of new things like 3D printing that's coming up, right? So and electrification and so there are these few enabling technologies that is allowing for a level playing field across the world, that sitting in India, right, we can reap the benefit of the Indian talent and the Indian cost structure, plus these level playing technologies to actually put out superior products at a much cheaper price, right? So the game here is not trying to just have a cost arbitrage that we are doing something cheap out of India. That's not the thing at all. We actually put out superior products because these kinds of manufacturing techniques and the battery technology, solar, whatever, all those things are creating a level playing field for us with the rest of the world to compete very, very easily. So that is the situation we are very, very conscious of, and say, hey, how can I maneuver around this and get going with some fabulous products?
Yeah, there's a whole new level of approach that is given by Agnikul, and also I think your other startups are also doing absolutely amazing in terms of innovation. Because trust me, 3D printed engines being just in the news is something which was very uncommon for Indian market, because It was never seen that, okay, we can print an engine and we can start working. And I think when I heard that news, I really was so proud about, like, oh my God, there is something new happening in the space tech here. So that's where it, that innovation and everything just boggles
That's
up and
exactly
says,
one of the points I want to highlight there is some of these new technologies can be done only at a smaller level. So if you ask the question, why is SpaceX not printing their rockets? Because they're actually doing big rockets. So that's where we have to actually see, is there a market for small rockets, right? And that's very important. It's not sufficient for me to say it's actually possible for me to do a 3D printed rocket, therefore I do. No, that's not what it is, right? Is there a market for a small rocket which can be 3D printed? Right. That's the connection that we have to make.
no, sir, I always wanted to ask you this question because, like, next questions will be based on a propulsion and things like that. So according to you, in a brief, how does a rocket engine works? To all the people who literally don't know anything about the rocket engines, how does a rocket engine work?
Oh, that's very simple to answer, right? So you take a balloon, blow it, blow into the balloon, right? And then you're holding it by the neck to keep the air pressure inside, and then you just slightly release your hold, and you have a rocket, right? So what's essentially happening is, if so long as you're holding it tight, right, and not allowing the pressurized air inside leak out, you have Pascal's law, which means that the pressure is equal inside everywhere. And similarly, the pressure outside as well is equal. So which essentially means that there is a pressure balance that's happening across the diaphragm of this balloon everywhere. And diametrically opposite sides, they actually have the pressure differential that cancels. So the balloon is not going anywhere. The moment you actually open up the mouth, right, and allow for this pressurized air to leak out, you're suddenly creating a pressure imbalance with the region that's diametrically opposite to the mouth, right, and then that propels this thing. So very the most common way of explaining this is to bring up Newton's third law and say something goes out here, so it goes like this, and so on. I don't actually use that explanation at all, because I want to be able to actually explain this to a second standard kid who has no knowledge about Newton's third law. Newton's third law is actually acting at every little point on the balloon, and it's acting everywhere. So when we now try to put a box around the whole thing and take it like a control volume approach, is when we can apply Newton's third law for the gas to the balloon. But that you lose your intuition at that stage. You have to now take Newton's third law as a gospel, right? Like what it's called. It's a law, right? Whereas you have to actually understand it at the level where you can feel the push that the balloon experiences. Okay, so the rocket is basically a glorified balloon. So the question is, like, what's pressurizing the chamber? That's where the issue is, right? So in the case of the balloon, we put the pressure in it through the mouth, and then we are releasing it, and so on. Instead, we have stuff that's actually stored behind this balloon that pushes stuff into the balloon to pressurize it, right? And that's the full rocket.
Thank you for such a brief introduction about the rocket science. I just want to ask you, like, there are ion engines working right now. There are thrusters where there are fuel-less maneuvers which are also being planned. So I want to ask you this, like, how far are we from the reality of sending millions and millions of rockets out for this world without the fuel, burning the fuel? And also, like, about the satellites which are also coming up with these kind of technologies, like, what do you feel about the way we are going to propagate in the space right now, and how are we going to advance also?
Right. So the answer to this question will actually disappoint you. uh, I'm not going to give you a straight answer in terms of like how far are we and all those things. It's all about what is it going to be used for, right? So if you are actually sending out rockets just to satisfy your fetish, nobody is going to pay you for it, right? And you're not going to get the money for it. And so typically what happens is you need to start PayPal and make a lot of money, and then you can actually make your rockets. And then you will start thinking about making money with those rockets rather than actually send out these things that you want still, right? So or you need to be like the US government of the 1950s post-war, getting into a Cold War with the Soviet Union. So those kinds of very unnatural situations is what does all these things. We have to understand this as an aerospace engineer. So aerospace engineers have this, they have their heads up in the clouds, right? Saying, wow, can I do this? Can I do that? Please, who is going to give you money? Right. So, and people will give you money if you are actually, you're satisfying a certain need. Okay. So this is the entrepreneur in me speaking. Okay. So we have to first of all look at what's the problem we are trying to solve for humanity. That humanity is actually at the entire center stage of our thought process. Okay. So if tomorrow suddenly we say there is this planet is actually going to get doomed by, let's say, 2050, if I don't start working on pushing a huge amount of this population into outer space, right? Suddenly there'll be a lot of money into it. Okay. So the every question that you ask, the quick answer is, why do you have to do it? If you have a good answer for me, then we can continue the conversation on when will things happen and all that. Unless I actually know for a fact this is actually useful, I'll say never.
Yeah, but like market is coming out with those kind of technology like ionic thrusters,
Correct.
everything.
So so that's where we have people like typically NASA trying to push the boundaries with new technology, hoping that it will be useful somewhere. But if you now notice what's happening in the last few years, right? This is actually a new phenomenon. Having deep tech in the hardware space, like mechanical engineering sciences, right? So hardware, the really hardware, like the kind of like Agnikul or whatever, right? So this is a relatively new phenomenon, right? Where we are now saying private startups can actually do this. Okay. So I think going forward, this is probably a bit more sustainable because it's going to be based on a need basis, as opposed to what, and then people are willing to fund. If you now see light in the day, except that people still are actually extremely reluctant to fund something that will generate revenue about 4 years from now. Whereas what you're asking for is it possible to ready technologies that might be useful at some point in the future, or this may actually spin off some new technologies, or to do something much more mundane than what it set out to be, that can be economically profited upon. But these are sort of like what we call as blue sky research. So they take their own pace, depending upon US Congress funding allocations and who wins the battle for getting a chunk of the pie, and all of that somewhere, and so on. So it's very haphazard. There is it's not a very straightforward way of predicting this will happen and we will actually go to outer space. That's it.
Yeah, but like I want to ask you, like, what's the nature of the satellites that we are putting up in the outer space? Because we are thinking of space debris is increasing. We are also thinking of reducing the space debris somehow or the other. And there are technologists who are thinking about reusing the fuel inside the satellites. But I want to ask you, like, because you thought of building, of course, your company has already been prototyping it, working on the 3D printed engines and also the rockets, and you are also working on the drones and the things like that. But I want to ask you, like, the nature of the satellites that we are actually launching and also the materials that we are using for the space tech right now. How is it going to improve and advance in the future?
Right. So I mean, materials technology is maturing a lot. That's something that we can see, and correspondingly manufacturing. So it's one thing to be able to develop materials, but the other thing is to be able to actually developing the associated manufacturing processes with it. Right? That's far harder many times. So all of that stuff is actually rapidly maturing. We are finding like newer and newer materials that are coming up, which can be manufactured well. And the third thing that is also equally important among all these things is to see how to do all these things in a cost-effective manner. And like for example, in the planes place, like the e-planes that we do, carbon fiber manufacturing has become like very commonplace, right? So even about 10, 20 years back, carbon composites were considered to be like the holy grail, or like a godsend. Very difficult, very expensive. So all of that stuff has been cost disrupted. So it's important to actually think of scale at which these things have to be done that will bring down the costs. And that's what is fueling the battery story. That's what is fueling the solar PV story. All of those things are actually about scaling it up so that the cost becomes very, very affordable. And that's what will propel technologies going forward, including aerospace. Aerospace is no exception to it. Aerospace used to be like the preserve of the high and mighty, the more expensive guys, and that's what I'm saying, right? So if, when you now have the other areas like batteries and solar PVs, all of those things disrupting for the good of the common people, right? We take advantage of it in coming up with superior aerospace products out of India with lesser and lesser capital, right? So this is how aerospace will do new innovations, whether it is rockets or satellites or planes or any of those. So it's very important to actually target the common people. So if you're a material scientist, the best thing to think about is how to make a material that's actually cheaper at scale, at some reasonable scale. It's always very intoxicating to think I will actually make the most expensive material. That's actually the dumbest thing to do.
Yeah, but like, I just want to ask you this one question, like, what's the most interesting fact that you've heard about the planet Earth? Like right now, what's the most important thing that you really think that I've heard this fact and nobody knows it, or something like that? Anything like that? Like, I just want to hear from you.
May not be something that is earth shattering. I mean, pun intended, I guess, again, because you're talking about Earth. So many people do not realize that aluminum is actually the third most abundant element on the planet. And so there is a lot that we do, particularly it comes very naturally to us as rocket scientists, to me as a rocket scientist. So there is a lot that we can actually do with aluminum in the uh, hydrogen space, in the water space, in the battery space. So going forward, you will actually hear a lot about it.
Yeah, I just want to ask, like, how to start a rocket company. That's my question, because most of the times when we think of us as a student, we have the curiosity, but we never get the funding. But as an academician, you might have also faced the same situation where you might have not got the proper funding because of many reasons. I just want to ask, like, how to start a rocket company.
No, the entrepreneurship fundamentals always hold. You should actually be solving a problem. It's not about a rocket company. If you come up with a problem for which you have a solution, you have a company, right? And you will be able to actually get investments for it and all of the stuff. So if you start with a rocket as I mean, the way you're posing it is how do you start a rocket company, right? So it's not even saying that the rocket is going to solve any problem in the first place. But let's say, for example, you now went one step forward and said, well, how do I actually find the problem that will be solved by rockets, right? So that I can start a rocket company. That's exactly the proverbial, what do you call, hammer looking for a nail, right? So just because you have a hammer, you start looking at every problem as a nail to hit on. That doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. So you have to look at what's the pain point that what do you call paying customers will have that they need to solve, and would Rocket be the best way to solve it? You might actually find that you can solve the problem with the computer vision or whatever it is, and you don't need rockets at all for some of the other problems, right? So yeah, you have to actually look at it more like a problem-solving point of view rather than so starting from a solution and trying to look at the one size fits all approach. No good answers on how you can start a rocket company. You shouldn't think about starting a rocket company. You should start thinking about what's the problem to solve. That's the answer.
Yeah. No, but I want to ask you, like, what are the books that you recommend to all the young folks like me, and also to the people who are really wanting to understand what is this space and the tech that we can really work on? Like, any books that you recommend to all of us?
It depends, right? So today's youngsters are very, very different than what it used to be. So back when we grew up, it's like very straight jacketed. We just go through these things. Your elders prescribe saying, do these things, you will get somewhere, and we just trust them and then keep going. Whereas today's youngsters are like looking around all over the place, and I think there are so many opportunities. The older people do have no clue what to exactly tell the youngsters, and if they told them something, it may look sort of preposterous. So I mean, if you want to actually study about rockets, there are a lot of like textbooks on rocket propulsion, but that's only the propulsion part. Right. So rockets are actually so multidisciplinary. If you want to talk about rockets, the rocket structures will be covered in some of the books. Rocket avionics will be covered in some of the books, and so on. So that's the reason why the elders used to say you need to go through a course, right? But at the end of it, you will still not be in a position to make a rocket. You just have to jump into it and start making it, and then you have to bring the team together and make it. And each of them in the team will actually be probably specializing in different aspects of it so that they can bring to bear their expertise and put things together. So it's one of those things where you're looking at as one of the six blind men looking at an elephant. You never know what's the full thing by yourself anytime. Going forward, it's one thing to be able to make a rocket. Another thing is to actually make a rocket company, right? So that requires a lot of entrepreneurship training, and maybe there are books and podcasts and that you have to listen to, or I don't know what you go through. There is so much material out there that you can pick up. So today's people, you guys essentially have an on-demand approach to things, right? So like just like on-demand mobility or on-demand what do you got, or telephony or whatever, right? Likewise, you have like on-demand education, on-demand knowledge, all of that stuff, and it's all out there. So it's a question of what you want to do and how you want to go about it. So we can't get very prescriptive about it today.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for this wonderful podcast. I think probably this is my first podcast. Yes, this is my first podcast about rocket propulsion, conversion. And I've done with many rocket, I've met many rocket scientists. I've also been doing podcasts with many rocket scientists. I think this is one of the best about talking about entrepreneurship, talking about academia. And I think I'm actually honored to have you in my podcast. And it was great that you actually emphasized on the problem statement more than being an entrepreneur. And I think this is going to be the best advice to all of them. And thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I just shared whatever little I knew. Thanks.